Hello, my name is Alan Wiseman, and I'm the chair of the Department of Political Science at Vanderbilt University. And along with Craig Volden at the Frank Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy at the University of Virginia, I'm also the co-director of the Center for Effective Lawmaking. We're very excited to welcome Congressman Gerry Connolly with us today. He represents Virginia's 11th congressional district, and we're excited to have him sit down with us and talk about his experiences within Congress. As many of you might know, Representative Connolly was first elected to Congress in 2009, having previously served in public office as a member of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors since 1995, including 5 years when he served as chair from 2004 to 2009. Representative Connolly has distinguished himself from his peers in many notable ways in regards to his lawmaking effectiveness and his engagement with the legislative process. For example, according to our data at the Center for Effective Lawmaking, he's been consistently identified as being one of the members of the House who scores what we refer to as above expectations in his lawmaking effectiveness. In other words, he is notably more successful at advancing his legislative agenda items than what we would have expected him to be given his relative seniority, his institutional position in the chamber, and whether or not he's been a member of the majority or minority party. Most recently, he was identified as being the most effective member of the House in advancing policies pertaining to government operations in the recently concluded 117th Congress. And even beyond that, he was identified as being the most effective lawmaker in the House overall in the 117th Congress, among all members, both Republicans and Democrats alike. So, Congressman Connolly, thanks so much for joining us at the Center for Effective Lawmaking. We're planning on asking you a series of relatively general questions, but we'd love to hear from you really in any direction you'd like to take it, including some specific examples from your own experience at your time in the House and even beyond before that.
Sure, let's get into it.
Great. Well, as I said before, what we'd like to do is start off with some questions about your background. And by that, I mean before you're elected to the House, to get a sense about how your previous political experiences really shaped your perspectives on being a lawmaker in Washington. So, as I alluded to in my introductory comments, starting with your service in the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, I'd be curious to hear what you felt that you learned from that position that then translated pretty organically to your time in the House.
Well, if I can just go back even further, right?
Please.
From a very early age, I always had an interest in both politics and international issues. So I studied to be a foreign missionary. Went in graduate school, I specialized in foreign policy. I ran two international NGOs here in Washington, non-governmental organizations, one on hunger and food and the other on refugees. Then I went after graduate school to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where I was a staffer. And even in the 20 years I was in private sector, my practice involved a lot of international business. And my 14 years in local government, I still did international projects for the World Bank, for the National Democratic Institute. I traveled overseas with an exchange program we had with Germany. I traveled to Israel. So I kept that flame alive. And of course, logically, when I came here to the House, I immediately joined the House Foreign Affairs Committee. To your question, I believe local government, first of all, I believe local government is the most important level of government because it is the level of execution. You actually have to do something. You can't prevaricate. You can't profundicate. You've got to do something. And you'd better deliver. And here's the other interesting thing. The accountability in local government, unlike other levels of government, is absolute. Citizens know, is the crime rate up or down? Is the high school dropout rate up or down? Are our schools performing or not? Did the street lamp get fixed or not? Did the pothole get filled or not? And so every day when you're in local government, the accountability is absolute. And tolerance for failure is very low. And so I love that. It's a little bit like being on the edge of a race car. And, tragedy could be just around the corner. And I kind of like that accountability. I like that thrill. I like the risk, but I also like the upside where you can see your handiwork, right? I can take you all over my district and I can show you the transit line I helped get built. I can show you new libraries I got built. I can show you roads I got into the state system. I can show you improvements I made. I can show you street signs I fixed. I mean, I had a street sign in an African-American neighborhood that was named Douglas, after Frederick Douglass, except it only had one S in it. And so somebody brought it to my attention, like, you do know they're misspelling the name? I mean, in honoring a great Black leader, they're actually dissing him by getting his name wrong. And one of the first things I did was insist on replacing that sign. Now, that may seem like a simple thing, but it showed enormous respect, right, for that community. And it fixed an irritant that mattered. And so in little and big ways in local government, you can change lives. You know, I wrote the first environmental plan for my county. You know, I had a massive affordable housing initiative. I had an anti-gang initiative. You know, just all kinds of stuff. We expanded parks. We did all kinds of stuff. It was a wonderful experience in being able to affect transformation and live to see it. You know, in Congress, a lot of what we do, we know will be consequential, but it could be years before anyone sees it. And it takes so long to get to the legislative accomplishment that you might not even live to see that either. So I just think it was great preparation in orienting me to the fact that, hey, writing a bill and getting it passed is only part of the solution. It's not an end in and of itself. And you got to be very aware of that. And secondly, you better write a bill with some practical experience. You know, I'll give you an example of one that I thought full of good intentions, but obviously whoever wrote it never ran a school district, and that was No Child Left Behind. You know, they put a big red F on schools that didn't meet sub goals. So you could have a school that was really succeeding in many categories, but you failed in one of them, and we give you an F. You fail overall, and we gave them no money. It was another unfunded mandate. What teacher wants to continue teaching in a failing school? What parent wants their kids to go to a failing school? What principal wants that to be in their career path? And so it compounded problems instead of resolving problems. It was good intentions gone terribly awry. Had somebody actually had experience in running a school system, I think that bill would have been a lot more pointed and effective. And so I think if you've had the local government experience, I think you bring that executive management perspective to the problems we try to address legislatively up here.
So that background on the whole, and then bringing that experience to Congress as a really important element of of thinking through expertise. Wanted to start from my perspective even a little bit earlier, and then partly because I'm here at the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy, so I wanted to talk a little bit about your Master's of Public Administration degree. How do you feel that studying public policy in graduate school might have provided some valuable insights to your subsequent governmental career? I know a lot of people decide to go to law school as one of their paths, but why public policy, and how did that play out either locally or in Congress?
Well, although there was a lot of public policy, my degree is actually in public administration.
Yeah.
And in those days anyhow, I'm sure it's improved, but Harvard was very divided between the theoretical, academic, abstract part of the school of government and the practical, manager who actually did it, right? So, and Harvard was snotty enough that it wouldn't give tenure to the practical people who didn't have the PhD. And that was a terrible mistake. And so we would have great academicians who had never served in government, in the school of government. And in fact, the classic example of that was the dean of the school at the time. He's still there, Graham Allison. Graham Allison went to undergrad at Harvard, got a master's at Harvard, got his PhD at Harvard, then was hired to teach at Harvard, did postgraduate work at Harvard, and then became the dean of one of the Harvard schools. Note, he didn't step outside of the Harvard system. Not only academic, he had no practical experience in government whatsoever, and yet he became the dean of what was supposed to be the professional analog to the business school for government. And when he finally got a government job briefly, he fell on his face and had to resign because he screwed up and he didn't know what he was doing. And that part of my degree, I did not respect. I'm all for, I'm a wonk. I love the abstract. I love the academic. But if we're going to prepare ourselves to help manage government, you've got to have some practical experience, and you've got to value people who have that experience. I'll give you an example, Craig. Howard Rafer had, I think, developed something called the decision tree, and very elaborate and really intriguing. But if you're an actual manager in the public sector, and I don't know, the flood is threatening your city, and you've got minutes to make decisions, you're not going to tell everyone, oh, at time out, we're going to do a decision tree analysis. That's not how the real world works. And the other thing at Harvard, in that particular program, there was this bifurcation between the young people in what they call the MPP program, the Masters in Public Policy, versus, say, the mid-career MPA. And I was in the latter, and I remember telling faculty members, we'll hire those people. They'll never run things. They'll be analysts, but the people who are going to run things are the people in public administration. And so a little more respect for that side of your graduate school might be an honor. But if your whole orientation is academician, what do you prize? You prize academics. And that's what you reward. That's what you want to teach. And I understand that. But if you want to be a professional school that is preparing managers of the future in the public sector, you've got to meld these two things. And in a way, I don't think the Kennedy School, when I was there, was always successful at.
So enough to get diving out into the real world, and that's where the real experience was taking hold for you.
Yeah, there's no question I benefited from the experience of Harvard, because it makes you very conscious of, how you organize a problem, how you try to marshal talent to address a problem. There are a lot of skills that get reinforced in that discipline. But I guess I'm talking about a little wariness about making public sector management an academic subject. It is much more than that, and you've got to give some respect to the people who've actually done it.
Congressman, I really appreciate the points you're raising regarding kind of practical expertise, on the ground experience, especially thinking about organizing staff, for example. And I guess related to that, a question that I had for you is, once again, thinking about prior to being elected to Congress, but after your experience at Harvard, you were a staff member in the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate. And, similar to some members of Congress that have some really meaningful staff experience, I'd be really curious to hear your perspectives on, how your previous experience as a staff member really informed your view about the role of staff in Congress, and or, how you went about organizing your own staff upon being elected to the House. How much of that was informed by your own experiences?
Yeah, that's a good one. There is no question that having been a committee staffer for 10 years was great preparation for coming to the House. I'd written bills. I'd written amendments. I knew how the process worked. I'd negotiated Senate and House provisions. I knew how to create a network among my colleagues and among staff. I knew how to interact with the executive branch. I knew how to get information and where to get information. I knew how to, quickly identify people who could be helpful and people who could not. I knew how to work with outside coalition groups who could influence the legislative process and become allies, or how to defang groups that might be, adversaries. And so no question, it was a huge advantage for me. And the institution was not mystical. I didn't spend 6 months, staring at the dome of the Capitol. Not that I don't revere the dome of the Capitol, I do, but you know what I mean? I mean, I was not in awe coming here because I'd already worked here for 10 years. So a huge advantage. And you could see it in especially my first 2 years, my freshman year, freshman term, with some others of my colleagues who did not have that advantage, that comparable experience.
I mean, right on that front, how do you feel the institution of Congress is working today to get members up to speed and kind of, help them through that initial learning curve to become effective lawmakers?
I think there are a lot of resources at your command, and I think I'm always impressed that freshmen get up to speed fairly quickly. Part of it's aptitude, part of it's intellect, part of it is the people you hire. Part of it is the mentors you might attract. I mean, we don't do a good job here when you become a new member of Congress. It's not like we assign somebody to you to help, be your Sherpa. I wish we did. I think it would be helpful. It's a little bit like being thrown into the deep end of the pool, and now you're on your own, learn how to swim. And that could, especially, by the way, that's true if you get elected in a special election. So if you don't come in with a class, you come in sort of mid-cycle, you're expected to become a member of Congress right after you're sworn in. You have no transition, and good luck. And that's hard. But I am impressed over the years with how quickly new members of Congress seem to adjust and become productive. And I think leadership's done a better job of also giving them opportunities so they get experience quickly. We're going to let you introduce that bill, and and that means you manage it. You're going to get that floor time opportunity to give a speech quickly, to make motions on the floor, so that you're not intimidated by that, and you get that done early, and you get comfortable with it. I think as an institution, we've done a much better job of doing that. When I was a freshman, we had I think we had 3 or 4 different orientation programs, and I found them all of great value. Today, those orientation programs are bifurcated on a partisan basis, and that's too bad, because the common experience of both Republicans and Democrats, I think, is enormously valuable, right? It's a shared experience. We're all new, we're all a little insecure, and we're in this together as Democrats and Republicans because we're all new. Actually bifurcating that, so no, Democrats go in one corner and Republicans go in another, and we all have our separate but parallel orientation programs, I just think contributes to further division and polarization in the institution.
Yeah, thanks. That's very helpful.
Well, thinking about your own experiences over the last many years you've been in Congress, as I noted in your introduction, in the most recently completed Congress, you were identified by the Center for Effective Lawmaking as being the most effective lawmaker in the House. But putting aside your success in the 117th Congress, I mean, Congress after Congress after Congress, you've consistently been identified as one of the most successful members within your party. And thinking about, perhaps starting off with a really positive orientation experience, knowing how to hire staff, as you said, your own personal expertise, having been a Senate staffer or Senate committee staffer. I guess bluntly speaking, what do you feel contributes to your general success in lawmaking in the House at this point in your career?
Well, I would say the first thing is putting together a core team that works well together, right? Who are committed to the mission. It isn't a 9-to-5 commitment for them. It's about the mission. It's about getting things done. I would say also I have an ethos that not everyone does, right? Which surprises me, but my ethos is I came here to legislate. That's why I'm here. So let's not just talk about a problem. Let's figure out what the legislative fix is, or how we can at least contribute to solving the problem and fixing it legislatively. And so I think that's a very important perspective and ethos you ought to bring to the job. As you know, I've got colleagues for whom the job is performative, has nothing to do with legislative achievement. It has to do with, bloviating on the floor or getting on cable television or something, but it's not about legislative achievement. That's the last thing in the world they want to do. So I do think it's your perspective. I also think you've got to, I learned this as a staff member. I learned this in other chapters of my life, but I mean, you got to be persistent. If people, first of all, you've got to become, persistent because things take time. But if your colleagues know that you are going to be persistent, it changes their perspective. In other words, if they know if we kill your bill in this Congress, we're never going to hear from you again about that. Well, good. If I know, on the other hand, oh my God, Alan's never going to give up. He's going to be right back at it first thing in the new Congress, and he's going to be even more tenacious and more, of a pain about it. Maybe we need to cut a deal. Maybe we need to finally take this seriously. So you can influence the environment by not only your demeanor, but by the nature of your commitment. I think persistence, but also a quality team that you've built that is with you. A lot of stuff gets done at the staff level. It's most of our legislative process is not done member to member. It's done staff to staff. And so having a competent quality staff that has the skill set to interact in a creative and respectful, but firm way with their counterparts, here in the House and in the Senate, and how to interact with the outside public and interest groups. Those are skills that take years to learn, and they're highly valuable. And I've been blessed with a team. The core of my team has been with me all 15 years I've been at Congress.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying really resonates with what we at the Center for Effective Lawmaking have found as the habits of highly effective lawmakers. And I want to kind of do a deeper dive into one of those habits as well, and that's about kind of being selective with the legislation that one puts forward. So,
Yeah.
So many members of Congress, it seems like they get scattered across so many different issue areas, and we found that the most effective lawmakers really dive in and specialize, maybe introduce about half of their legislation in a single issue area. And then when we look at your portfolio, it seems about half, maybe just above half, are in issues of government operations, aligning very nicely with your committee assignments, aligning very nicely with your background expertise, your district interests. So wondered a little bit more about that specialization, and was that a coincidence or an active strategy? And how do you kind of balance that government operations against still your deep interest in international affairs, where your second largest category of bill sponsors?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. Let's put aside, there's always opportunity, right? So, you can't dismiss that. But the piece of advice I got when I first got here by more senior members was, pick a lane, pick something that you're going to own, you're going to really specialize in. You can't, as you suggest, Craig, you can't be all things to all people. You can't cover the whole waterfront. Even though my own intellectual curiosity rebelled against that advice initially. I love budgets and economics. I love foreign policy. I love having run a local government that was a full service local government, one of the largest local governments in America. As you might imagine, my interest was extensive in a broad range of things. And I wanted to come here and make a change, make a difference. But I can't be a healthcare expert. I can't be a financial wizard. I can't be, the walking budgeteer of the Congress. I can't be an IT expert. I can't be a foreign policy. I can't be all those things. So, and part of what shapes you, I think, is the committee assignment you get. I didn't like my assignment on oversight and reform when I first got it, because I wanted to be on transportation and infrastructure, because the nature of my district, transportation is almost always number one issue.
Yeah.
And I didn't get it. They decided to give it to someone else who didn't care at all about transportation. And by the way, I brought enormous expertise on transportation, given my role in local government. I did public-private partnerships. I did toll roads. I did a transit lane. I did federal funding formulas. I mean, the whole thing. And it just seemed such a waste of experience not to put me in TNI. They put me in oversight and reform, and I was so upset. They said, well, all right, we'll give you another one if you want it. And I foolishly asked to be in budget because I love budgets. And everyone said, do not go in 3 committees. And everybody was right. With really good intention, being a policy wonk, my motives were pure, but there was no upside to being on the 3rd committee, especially budget. So I decided, all right, I'm going to make oversight and reform work for me. And given the nature of my district, I got, we're dealing with federal employee issues, federal contract issues, government operations, how the government, operates and is structured. And how accountability of vehicles like inspectors general, looking at public policy issues that just make me go pity pat because they just do, like how do we handle improper payments, and on and on. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to make oversight and reform my home committee. I'm going to make something of it. The opportunity for both foreign affairs and oversight, not being A committees, is you can move up rapidly in seniority because there's a lot of turnover as people go on to other committees. And I decided, all right, I'm going to make them work and be, move up fast. And I decided that given the contours of my district, federal employee issues, postal reform, and federal IT modernization and cyber and other tech issues was my lane. That's going to be my lane, and that's what I focused
on. And so part of that committee is also oversight. And so could you talk a little bit about how engaging in oversight might affect lawmaking?
Oh, sure. When I was subcommittee chair, I would say there are probably a dozen examples where we structured hearings and then introduced legislation based on the evidence and data we had collected during the hearings. IT, federal IGs, inspectors general, federal employee issues, maybe undoing some of the depredations of the Trump administration that we thought were injurious to government operations and the workplace for federal employees. So yeah, the direct relationship between oversight and that. The other example I'd give you, which I think is unique in the history of Congress, I challenge you both to see if I'm wrong, but I co-authored and co-wrote the bill FITAR, the Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, about 9 years ago now. And I vowed that I was going to stick around in our committee and see that it was implemented, because the predecessor legislation was called Clinger-Cohen, and that was the framework legislation for how the federal government approached IT. So our bill was a modernization of that, an update of that, and the new framework. And the problem with Clinger-Cohen is, Cohen became Secretary of Defense and Clinger retired, and there was nobody invested in making sure it got implemented. So I vowed that we were not going to do that. And we have had 15 hearings. I created a scorecard with 7 or 8 categories, and they're flexible. We sometimes retire one and create a new one for scoring every federal agency in terms of how they're doing in those categories, and then an overall score. It's really made a difference. We've saved over $24 billion. With a B. I don't know how many other programs can say that. But more importantly, in some ways, we've created an accountability architecture and an incentive architecture for federal agencies to get right with the Lord, retire legacy systems, consolidate data centers, move to the cloud, and make sure you're encrypted and crypto protected. Those are all really important things when you think of the assets the federal government manages. So I'm very proud of that. 15 hearings over 7 years. And as a result, let's say those in the bureaucracy who would like to resist congressional oversight realized they're never going to give up, are they? They're going to have 2 hearings a year. We could be hauled before them. We're going to have to account for ourselves. And CIOs have used it to go to the boss saying, hey, we don't want another bad grade, and here's a plan for, improving. And so CIOs really welcome, that oversight. So you can make oversight a very powerful tool if you're, if you use the hearing process to its best purpose, as opposed to using it to, club somebody or for political partisan advantage. Hearings can do that too, but I kind of like qualitative, substantive hearings that can be used to effectuate change.
And I'm hearing that persistence value and habit coming through again, not just in coming up with your legislation, but making sure it's implemented well.
Right.
Yeah, I found this pretty fascinating. Not only you identifying the relationship between oversight and legislating and the obvious role the committees play in Congress, but quite bluntly, I especially appreciated you being so open about not really finding your favorite niche early on in Congress in terms of committee assignments, but then being quite entrepreneurial in terms of carving out a policy portfolio that really comported with your priorities given where you sat.
Right.
I guess related to that point, if we think about the general organization of members of Congress beyond committees, it seems like there's a variety of issue area caucuses or ideological caucuses that help to facilitate other forms of structure in the House. You yourself are a member of the Taiwan caucus, the Cloud Computing caucus, the New Democrat Coalition. And I'd be curious if you could provide us with some perspectives on what role you feel these caucuses or these coalitions play in the contemporary legislative process.
Yeah, for sure. All caucuses are not created equal. So there are caucuses that are very effective and influence things around here. I was a co-founder and original member of the Sustainable Environment and Energy Caucus, SEEK, and became co-chair of it. And we've had over the years some really meaningful input in an environmental perspective on various things. So we made sure there was environmental provisions in, say, the stimulus bill back in 2009 under Obama. We made sure that there were environmental concerns in the legislation we passed in the 117th. We've teed up the issue of environmental justice in the work Congress does, so it's ever present on our minds. We've got speakers, we got members, but we also push a legislative agenda, and we try to support members of our caucus who have legislation and to magnify their impact by using the caucus to endorse their bills. So it's not just them introducing something, we've got their backs, and we're, as I said, augmenting the impact of that legislation and hopefully improving the chances of its passage. There are also sort of country caucuses. So I co-chair Taiwan. Well, given the tensions with China, that's actually a very meaningful position, and we will address issues as caucus chairs, and that carries some weight in terms of the voice of the caucus, especially countering Chinese malign activity and drawing a line that says, hey, whatever happens in the Taiwan Straits, it's not going to be resolved kinetically, right? We're not going to allow a military solution to be imposed on the people of Taiwan. And we've had enormous success, if you think about it. Not just us. I don't mean to say it's only us, but China doesn't have a single friend in Congress, and Taiwan has lots of friends, so we've made a lot of progress. And I'm co-chair of the Turkey caucus, not because I have any ethnic group in my district particularly. I went to it based on my experience in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I felt Turkey is a strategic country. Its geopolitical location is just, you can't overstate how important it is. It is the second largest NATO participant after the United States. It's been a reliable ally. It's a Muslim democratic country. We need to, help Turkey become a member of the EU and continue its Western orientation. Unfortunately, the Europeans, refused to get over lots of biases about Turkey, and Erdogan got more and more autocratic in his behavior. And we had a huge, I would say approaching 250, friends of Turkey in Congress when I first got here. And we were growing and all that, and Erdogan managed to destroy it. And I would say, there's a lot of rebuilding that has to be done for Turkey. So I now remain a caucus co-chair, but not so much to advocate or protect Turkey, but to be a thorn on the side of Erdogan, frankly. Calling him out because he could, if I were to resign as caucus chair, my voice is diminished. As caucus chair, it may irritate him no end, but he has to listen to me. And so I've used that platform to try to influence Turkish politics, and even recently, for example, his blocking of Sweden's advancement, accession to NATO. And I think we were able to have some influence on that. So different caucuses are, go in different directions. Some are nominal. There are, there are probably hundreds of caucuses. And some I'm very active in, and some I sign on to show my support, but they don't really do much. I formed the Smart Contracting Caucus. And, we periodically meet and have a program and tee up some issues that I think are useful both for the government and for the private sector. So you can use it as a forum. You can also use it to just show solidarity with people in your district, who just want to make sure that you care about their issues. And that's why you join. Now, the Vietnam Human Rights Caucus. I'm a member. I go and I speak every year when we have a ceremony up here. And that matters a lot to my Vietnamese community in my district.
So yeah, hearing about a lot of the different platforms and issues that can be addressed through caucuses. I think Alan also mentioned kind of the New Democrats, and we hear a lot about the kind of ideological caucuses. I'd be interested in your thoughts on one of our recent findings. Some of our research is suggesting that when Democrats are in the majority in Congress, it seems to be the more liberal wing of the Democratic Party whose bills progress furthest through the House and into law. And in contrast, when Republicans are in the majority, the conservative wing of the Republican Party does not have a similar level of lawmaking success. I just wondered if that is something that resonates with your own experience or insights, or what might be driving that sort of pattern in your view.
I think that's true. But I think it's true in part because the composition of Congress has changed so radically since I've been here. So when I got elected as a freshman, the Blue Dogs, more conservative Democrats, were very large in number. I mean, I don't know, 50 or 60. And they had real influence in the course of public policy. When we were writing bills like Dodd-Frank on financial reform, when we were writing the Affordable Care Act on healthcare reform, we had to sit down with them and negotiate. And there were some real hot and heavy issues, and they carried clout. They had weight. What happened in the disastrous elections of 2010, if you will, the Tea Party election, is all of those people got wiped out. The Blue Dog Coalition went from whatever it was, 60 something members to like 15. And we were in the minority after the 2010 wipeout. And so their voice was significantly diminished. Because if you think about it, more moderate to conservative Democrats, by definition, were coming from swing and marginal districts. And when there was a wave, they got washed away to sea. And that's what happened in 2010. So as a result, permanently, that voice was significantly reduced in influence. And that automatically meant our caucus became more liberal. And that I would say those dynamics persist today.
And so some of that hollowing out of the middle means the parties are polarizing, and it feels like, at least in the Democratic Party, that's giving more influence to the more liberal wing.
Yeah, no question about it. And you see the same thing in reverse in the Republican caucus. And of course, this is all part of a bigger trend of the ideological realignment of the parties. When I was a staffer 40 years ago here in the Senate, there was a liberal wing of the Republican Party. Mm-hmm. People forget Mac Mathias was a Republican and James Allen from Alabama was a Democrat. Yeah. Today, that would have been impossible. Mac Mathias would have to be a Democrat, and James Allen would have to be, and would happily be, a Republican. So that realignment is real, and everybody went to their respective corners, and as a result, there are no sort of breaks on the ideological drift of the two parties. There's no big wing saying, "Hey, stop, hold everything." And I'll give you an example. If Kevin McCarthy had an active moderate to liberal wing of his party who were assertive, he could use that to go to the far right saying, "I'd love to give you everything you want, but I can't. Look at those guys are screaming too. And what am I supposed to do? I got a balancing act here, and you're gonna have to respect that." Right now, the only crowd that speaks up that has any influence or clout is the far right, because the moderates have completely ceded their influence. When you saw him running for speaker, for example, what was the moderate position? They actually made buttons for expressing their permanent and forever support of Kevin, and essentially they said, "You don't need to worry about us at all. We're with you from the beginning to the very bitter end." Well, that meant he was released, he was liberated to only have to listen to and pander to the concerns of the right. And the moderates surrendered unilaterally any leverage, any influence they might have. And we're still paying a price for that on the eve of a potential shutdown, on a possible impeachment inquiry of Biden, all because he gets to pander without any worry at all to the right. So the ideological realignment of the two parties and the consequences of the election of 2010, I think, have had a profound impact on our polity and how this institution works.
Congressman, I'd like to dive into the weeds a little bit to get your perspectives on the ways in which the legislative process works in the contemporary Congress, especially across both chambers, because as I noted, you were identified by the center as the most effective lawmaker in the House in the previous Congress. You have this long track record of legislative success, but even someone who is consistently successful as you often sees, similar to many other representatives, sees many of your sponsored bills make their way from the House and then ultimately die in the Senate. And, really, especially given your past work experience in the Senate, I'd be really curious to hear your perspectives on, how you see the nature of bicameralism in the contemporary Congress. Do you think it's changed over the last 30 or 40 years? Or do you think there's always been this ongoing tension between the chambers and there really isn't anything new here?
I've always thought, even when I worked in the Senate, that there was an arrogance and haughtiness in the Senate that really impeded some of our work in the institution. Start with the fact that they claim to be, quote, the upper body. The only reason they're referred to as the upper body is when the first Congress met in New York, the Senate met upstairs and the House met downstairs. And the reference was, go to the upper body if you want to talk to them. It did not connote higher status. And even that phrase, buried in that phrase, are the seeds of real tension and dysfunction and ignorance, frankly, of the Constitution. Because remember, James Madison thought the premier entity of the U.S. government was the House. And I won't say we're the upper body, but the lack of respect from the other body, I don't just mean psychologically. For example, We have something called suspension bills. And that means that if you got a non-controversial bill, we'll have a vote for you on the floor and suspend the rules and pass your bill. Now, I'm just to give you 100% of the Senate, 75 Senate originated suspension bills, 100% passed the House. Do you know what the comparable figure of House bills sent over to the Senate is? 29%. Of the 231 suspension bills we sent over there, 67 became law. Now, that inequity we control. But the arrogance, of the Senate expecting its will to be honored, there's a simple fix for that. Insist on parity. And if you're not willing to do that, well, then we're going to get, jammed by the Senate more often than not. There are, when bills are done, when bills are negotiated, the House and Senate versions in darkness, anything can happen and anything does. And it magnifies whim over policy. So I can't tell you how often I've had bills stymied by a particular senator who just whimsically decided he didn't want to do it, didn't like it. And you think all our hard work, all of the policy and research and data and lobbying and advocacy and negotiations, and at the very 11th hour, as we're trying to wrap things up in December, some SOB in the Senate kills it for no reason, and nor do they have to give a reason. And this happens way more than I think we ought to put up with. And one thing, the one piece of leverage we discovered, and by the way, becoming, your number one effective lawmaker, was suspension bills. We suddenly let it be known that we had some amendments to these Senate suspension bills. And all of a sudden, 3 of my key bills on our counterpart committee in the Senate suddenly were released, passed the Senate, and became law. By the way, allowing me to surpass my Senate counterpart, who otherwise would have been the most effective lawmaker. And it's kind of ironic. He had
Senator Peters, you suggest.
Yeah, he was headed toward number one until he had to release my 3 bills, and that's how I became number one. And I wasn't even aware of your ranking, to be honest with you. I mean, I knew you did this, but I didn't know. He's very aware of it, it was kind of fun. But and I found the irony delicious. But the badinage between the Senate and the House is serious, and the House has got to repair its prerogatives with respect to the Senate, and there have to be consequences if the Senate won't reciprocate. And I gave you, think about that. 100% of their 75 bills made it through the House. 29% of our bills made it through the Senate. That disequilibrium is profound and affects legislation, and it affects our ability to even get ranked by you how effective we are.
I'd love to spend a little bit of more time behind the scenes here, in particular regarding those bills that don't become law on their own, but are kind of rolled into other packages, either in full or in part. And was wondering if you can give us some of the insights into those behind the scenes negotiations. For example, it seemed like your office and committee might have been in a position to influence those decisions as part of the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2023, or a variety of other settings. Just sort of, how do those kind of bundles of bills get put together, and does that help at least partially resolve this this issue of too many things getting stuck either in committee or across chambers?
Yes, it can. There are myriad ways in which you could be a very influential legislator, as a thought leader, as a policy wonk, without a product. Example, when we were doing COVID relief, it was a very intellectually fertile time, and we were getting on almost daily caucus calls because we're in the pandemic, trying to figure out, well, what do we need? And people were home and they were reflecting on their experience with, so many different things: nursing homes, hospitals, and one of my big things, because I come from local government, right, is you got to help local governments right now. And by the way, they're the ones that actually will implement what we pass. If we're going to pass, vaccination subsidies, well, the federal government isn't really going to be putting injections in our arms. It's going to be health clinics at the local government level. So we got to help them. And many of them were hurting. And you may remember Mitch McConnell, Republican leader of the Senate, said, let them file for bankruptcy. He actually said that. Many other Republicans had no sympathy whatsoever to our state and local governments, particularly our local governments. So I was very passionate about it. I brought it up every time we had a conference call, that it needed to be included in legislation. We ultimately got $350 billion for state and local governments that made a huge difference in their ability to maintain everything from childcare to transit to social services, health clinics, you name it. I was very proud of that. Now, it isn't in my name, and only the people who are on those conference calls maybe are aware of the fact that I was that advocate, but it had a salubrious effect, and we were able to get it into the final bill, and it made a huge difference. So there are many paths to influencing things. Sometimes, like I had a bill to electrify the postal fleet when I was a freshman. In 2009, I introduced that bill. A freshman came along a number of years later and asked me if I'd be willing to give him that bill, let him take the lead, and I did. Well, it was my idea. It was my legislation. Nobody else was talking about it 15 years ago. There was an opportunity with stimulus money to actually make that investment. Unfortunately, the Postal Service didn't want to. And now, of course, we are doing it, right? Well, I could take you through a thread that leads to me 15 years ago. It's the bill that we looked at doesn't have my name on it, and I was happy to do that. I thought, okay, if you got the energy and enthusiasm, you're willing to carry that bill, I'll step back and be co-sponsor and let you take the lead. The key here is getting it done, right? Like, let's try to get it done. So, on the other hand, I've also worked with some people who were not particularly generous people, including committee chairs, who steal other people's ideas and put their name on. And there's not one thought in that bill they're responsible for, and they just stole it because they could. So, if you are happy to influence things, I worked for Paul Sarbanes of Maryland on the Foreign Relations Committee. Maybe one of the brightest people I've ever worked with. He didn't like taking the spotlight. He didn't like being the author of a lot of legislation. And yet he was so smart and so trusted as a go-to person for opinion that he was profoundly influential around here, even though he didn't have that much legislation to his name. So there are people like that too.
Thanks for that. Congressman, we want to be mindful of your time. But that said, hopefully we could get one last question in.
Yeah.
Because the Center for Effective Lawmaking is actually housed at universities, Vanderbilt University and the University of Virginia, respectively. We'd be curious to know if you have any particular advice that you'd offer to college students who might be especially interested in working with or in Congress at some point in the future.
Well, to me, the best way to get involved in the political process is to get involved at your local level. Ella Grasso, the late governor of Connecticut, used to say, bloom where you're planted. So wherever you find yourself, if you're a student at Vanderbilt, get involved in that community and get involved when you move back home. Don't be a stranger to your own community. Get involved politically or civically, volunteer, tutor, mentor, whatever, you're most comfortable with, because that can take you on paths that lead to politics. You see problems and you realize I can't fix it at this level. We're going to have to fix it at a political route. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I think there are opportunities to intern for in campaigns or in offices of elected officials. I've got interns both in my district office and up here in Capitol Hill. And over 15 years, I don't know, I probably now have, a couple of hundred young people who are bright and promising, and intern. Many of my staff started out as interns for me, and we hired them because they were good. And so you can get your feet wet and decide whether you like it or what you do and don't like or what you're good at. And you can make a contribution to the same thing. So looking to volunteer, which, covers a lot of ground, and maybe being more active by interning or even ultimately working for a political figure or government, I think is a wonderful thing. I think public service is a wonderful thing myself. I'm motivated by that a lot more than I am about making money. And because I think at the end of the day, living a purposeful life, what gives you meaning, what gets you up in the morning, I think it's far more important than just making money. But that's me.
Really appreciate those insights and hope that our students share them as well. Before we completely sign off and thank you once again, is there anything more that, we've dominated the questions? Is there anything else about effective lawmaking that you wish we would have asked you about, or other insights that you'd like to share with us?
I think something that gets overlooked sometimes in polity is passion. There has to be a fire somewhere in your body, your psyche, that fuels you. I don't mean some rigid pathological passion, but like in my case, I grew up as a student in the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement, and those two things really have been formative for me for the rest of my life. They gave me huge insights into how things work or don't work. They gave me huge insights into how skewed justice was in America that needed to be addressed. The right of freedom to express yourself, protest, respecting other points of view. All of that came from those experiences and informed me to this very day. And I have a passion about it. When I saw what happened to George Floyd, it reminded me of the clubbing of anti-war protesters because they dared to exercise their American right to be heard and dissent. And, I had a visceral reaction to it because it brought me back to the 60s and, Chicago, where I was. So I think passion can be, in fact, I would argue it's a necessary ingredient if you're going to play this role long term, because people pick up on it. Inauthenticity, by definition, lacks any real passion for anything, right? It's all a mask, and we have a lot of that, unfortunately, in public life. But having genuine passions that motivate you to effectuate change and make things better. I know that sounds a little Pollyannish, but it's for me, it's very real. That's what I'm trying to do every day. And
presumably helps with that persistence that you were talking about before.
That's right. That's right. And so people with a passion, I hope they'll think about public life. We need more of it.
Thank you so much. Great place to end, and we really appreciate your public service as well as your time with us tonight.
Thank you both.
Thanks so much for your time, Congressman. Really appreciate it.